Among the rolling hills of Kentucky, where morning fog still drifts across forgotten fields, stand the crumbling ruins of what was once Pleasant Hill, a Shaker settlement that vanished without warning in 1834. More than 300 souls simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only hollow structures and a silence so deep that local residents still won't set foot on those grounds once the sun goes down. For nearly 2 centuries, the state of Kentucky has kept its official records locked away, buried in archives that few have dared to explore. But recently surfaced testimonies from a visiting Ohio inspector have uncovered a truth so disturbing that it forces us to rethink everything we believed about America's religious communities. What unfolded at Pleasant Hill wasn't merely a tragedy, it was 27 years of organized terror wrapped in the garments of holy devotion. Before we pull back the curtain on the dark reality that authorities fought so hard to keep hidden, I need to ask something of you. This channel isn't meant for everyone, only for those willing to confront the most shadowed chapters of American history. If you're one of the rare few who hunts for these buried truths, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what state you're watching from. Now let's travel back in time and uncover how one family's greed turned a sacred community into something far darker. What started in 1807 as a shining example of spiritual purity would become one of Kentucky's most carefully guarded secrets, engineered by a family whose rot ran deeper than anyone dared imagine. The year was 1807, and the Second Great Awakening was tearing through Kentucky like a storm. In this charged atmosphere of religious passion, Pleasant Hill rose as a refuge for those hoping to live by Shaker principles, celibacy, shared property, and withdrawal from worldly corruption. Nestled in the fertile bluegrass region near Harrodsburg, the community pulled in hundreds of converts who freely gave up their earthly belongings in pursuit of spiritual perfection. At the center of the seemingly devout settlement stood the Richardson family, whose reach extended into every corner of daily life. Elder Samuel Richardson, a tall figure with sharp gray eyes and a voice that commanded every room, had come from Ohio claiming direct ordination from Mother and Lee's original followers. His carefully tended appearance, always clothed in simple but spotless Shaker garments, and his encyclopedic command of Shaker theology persuaded even the most doubtful visitors of his legitimacy. His wife, Sister Martha Richardson, had publicly abandoned their marriage in keeping with Shaker celibacy, while quietly maintaining their relationship behind closed doors in Samuel's private quarters. Martha had a near-supernatural gift for reading people's fears and motivations, a talent she deployed with devastating precision in managing the community's intricate social web. Her soft voice and quiet smile concealed a calculating mind that those around her found simultaneously intimidating and impossible to resist. Their family network spread through the community like the roots of an ancient tree. Their eldest son, Brother Ezekiel Richardson, broad-shouldered and carrying his father's commanding presence, oversaw the community's vast agricultural operations. He had transformed Pleasant Hill's farming from basic subsistence into a commercial enterprise supplying produce markets throughout the Ohio River Valley. His younger brother, Brother Caleb Richardson, functioned as the community's unofficial intelligence chief, monitoring private conversations and personal correspondence with an efficiency that would have impressed any modern surveillance operation. Sister Rebecca Richardson, Samuel and Martha's eldest daughter, managed the women's dormitories and new convert orientation. At 28, having never married, she channeled what observers described as fierce maternal energy into overseeing the community's female members. Her ability to dismantle psychological defenses and reconstruct personalities to Richardson family specifications was spoken of with a kind of hushed reverence among those who survived her spiritual counseling sessions. The youngest Richardson daughter, Sister Patience, kept the community's official records and handled its correspondence. Though only 24, she possessed a remarkable gift for forgery, able to convincingly replicate any handwriting after studying it for just a few days. Her meticulous documentation built the paper facade that shielded the family's operations from outside eyes. Samuel's brother, Brother Jeremiah Richardson, commanded the community's profitable furniture workshops. A master woodworker who had learned his craft before the family's corruption began, Jeremiah upheld the quality standards that made Pleasant Hill furniture coveted across Kentucky and beyond. His workshops employed nearly 50 community members in what appeared to be honorable craftsmanship but functioned more like a forced labor operation. Brother Isaiah Richardson, Samuel's cousin, ran their thriving seed business that supplied farms across 3 states. Isaiah's monthly journeys to distant customers offered perfect cover for activities that would have horrified his business partners. His mild manner and obvious agricultural expertise made him welcome on farms from Ohio to Tennessee, where his true purposes stayed carefully concealed. Martha's sister, Sister Hannah Collins, supervised the community's kitchens and food distribution. Her control over nutrition allowed the family to reward obedience and punish defiance in ways that appeared entirely natural to outside observers. Hannah had accumulated deep knowledge of herbs and substances, knowledge she applied with clinical precision to manage the community's physical and psychological condition. Even the extended family served critical functions. Samuel's elderly mother, Mother Sarah Richardson, stood as a living symbol of the community's supposed spiritual authenticity. Her presence lent credibility to Samuel's claims of long-standing Shaker connections, while her apparent frailty made her an unlikely suspect in any wrongdoing. In truth, Mother Sarah was the family's strategic mastermind, her decades of experience in manipulation steering their long-range planning with quiet authority. Brother Nathan Richardson, Samuel's youngest brother, handled the community's external dealings with local officials and neighboring settlements. His charm and apparent sincerity had persuaded Sheriff William Morrison of Mercer County that Pleasant Hill was a model religious community deserving both protection and goodwill. Nathan's steady donations to local churches and civic groups purchased the kind of influence that proved invaluable whenever questions arose about the community's activities. The community's reputation spread far beyond Kentucky. Visitors marveled at the pristine buildings, the perfectly maintained gardens, and the apparent contentment of nearly 400 members who showed no visible signs of coercion or distress. What outsiders couldn't detect was the elaborate web of surveillance and control the Richardson family had quietly woven throughout Pleasant Hill. Every aspect of community life flowed through family members who reported directly to Samuel and Martha during their nightly strategy sessions. No decision, however small, happened without Richardson approval. No member could leave the grounds without a family escort. Even brief trips to nearby Harrodsburg required detailed justification and close supervision. The family had engineered what modern psychologists would recognize as a perfect totalitarian environment. Information traveled only downward from leadership while surveillance ensured that any sign of dissent was quickly identified and extinguished. The community's isolation, both geographic and psychological, made resistance seem not merely dangerous but unthinkable to most members. New converts underwent a carefully engineered indoctrination process that stripped away their previous identities and rebuilt their personalities according to Richardson specifications. This process, supervised primarily by Rebecca and Martha Richardson, typically took 6 months to complete. By its conclusion, new members had been psychologically reshaped into compliant followers who experienced any questioning of family authority as equivalent to questioning God himself. The community's daily routine reinforced this control at every turn, members rising at 4:30 each morning to Brother Caleb's bell, eating breakfast prepared under Hannah Collins's watchful eye, and spending their days at assigned tasks engineered to prevent private conversations or independent thought. Evening worship services led by Samuel Richardson, with various family members playing supporting roles, wove genuine spiritual elements together with subtle psychological manipulation that deepened dependency and crushed critical thinking. The first fracture in Pleasant Hill's perfect surface appeared on a bitter February morning in 1812, when Brother Thomas Whitman, a successful merchant who had donated his entire estate to the community 5 years earlier, began raising uncomfortable questions about the community's finances during a public gathering. Thomas had arrived at Pleasant Hill in 1807 as one of its earliest and most generous converts. A widower in his 50s whose children had perished in a cholera outbreak, he had found comfort in the Shaker promise of spiritual family and eternal purpose. His donation of a thriving dry goods business and substantial property holdings had supplied much of the capital that allowed the Richardson family to establish their operations on such a grand scale. For 5 years, Thomas had been the model community member, tireless in his work, mentoring to younger converts, and never once questioning leadership decisions. His transformation from prosperous businessman to humble Shaker brother impressed visitors and reinforced the community's reputation for spiritual integrity. But Thomas's business background made him uniquely capable of spotting the discrepancies that slipped past everyone else. His practiced eye for financial detail, combined with access to certain operational records through his agricultural work, gradually revealed inconsistencies that troubled his conscience. The seed business profits reported by Brother Isaiah didn't match the figures Thomas had observed during visits to customer farms. The furniture workshop revenue seemed impossibly large given the volume of pieces he witnessed being produced. Most puzzling of all, the community's membership numbers failed to align with the consumption records he maintained for feed and supplies. "Brothers and sisters," Thomas said, rising during the monthly community meeting, his weathered hands holding several pages of carefully calculated figures. "I've been praying over some concerns that weigh heavily on my heart. Our blessed community has prospered greatly, yet I see contradictions in our records that trouble my soul." The silence that followed was absolute. Around the packed meeting hall, Richardson family members exchanged glances lasting mere seconds but communicating volumes. Samuel Richardson's face stayed serene, his hands folded peacefully, yet those who knew him well caught the subtle tightening around his eyes. Sister Martha's gentle smile never moved, though her knuckles whitened as her grip on her prayer book grew tighter. "The seed business," Thomas continued, his voice gaining confidence as he pressed forward. "Brother Isaiah reported profits of $800 from Ohio customers last quarter, but when I delivered supplies to those same farms, I calculated sales that should have produced nearly $1,200. Where has this missing money gone?" Brother Caleb Richardson rose from his seat near the door, ostensibly to check the room's temperature, but his movement placed him squarely between Thomas and the exit. Sister Rebecca's eyes never left Thomas's face, cataloging every expression and gesture for later use. Around the room, other Richardson family members made subtle adjustments to their positions, creating an almost invisible net of surveillance. Furthermore, Thomas pressed on, apparently unaware of the dangerous ground he was crossing. "Our membership rolls list 400 souls, yet our food consumption suggests we're feeding barely 250. Brother Jeremiah's furniture workshops claim to employ 50 members, but I count only 37 who regularly report for that duty. These numbers don't reconcile, and as stewards of God's bounty, shouldn't we demand accuracy in our accounting?" The response came not from Samuel but from Mother Sarah Richardson, whose elderly voice carried surprising weight across the silent hall. "Brother Thomas," she said, her tone blending gentle correction with unmistakable warning, "your concerns reveal a heart still clinging to worldly thinking. In our blessed community, we trust that our leaders, guided by divine wisdom, manage all temporal matters for our spiritual benefit. Perhaps you need time for prayer and reflection to overcome these doubts." Samuel Richardson nodded gravely, radiating paternal concern for a wayward child. "Brother Thomas, your dedication to our community's welfare moves me deeply. But perhaps your mind has been clouded by memories of your former worldly life. Sister Hannah, would you prepare Brother Thomas some of your special chamomile tea? I believe he needs rest and reflection to clear his thoughts." The meeting continued for another hour, but Thomas Whitman's questions had permanently altered the atmosphere. Other members avoided his eyes, suddenly finding urgent reasons to study their prayer books. The Richardson family's handling of subsequent agenda items carried an undercurrent of tension that hadn't existed before Thomas's intervention. That evening, Thomas was found dead in his dormitory bed by Sister Rebecca, who discovered the body during her routine evening inspection. Her tearful announcement to the gathered community painted a picture of peaceful transition. Brother Thomas passed gently in his sleep, she told them, called home by the Lord after confessing his sin of doubt during evening prayers. His final words were an apology for allowing worldly concerns to cloud his spiritual vision. The community accepted this account with the resigned faith they had been conditioned to embrace. After all, questioning the leadership's version of events was equivalent to questioning God's will. Brother Thomas's funeral the following day became a lesson about the dangers of allowing business concerns to interfere with spiritual submission. But young Sister Mary Caldwell, who cleaned the dormitories each morning, noticed details that would haunt her for decades. When she entered Thomas's room to prepare it for cleaning, she was struck by a sharp almond scent that lingered despite the windows having been open all night. Thomas's fingernails had turned a distinct blue color she had never seen on any corpse, including her own grandfather, who had died peacefully at home. Most disturbing of all, she found traces of white foam around his mouth that Sister Rebecca had carefully wiped away before summoning help. Mary watched in mounting horror as Brother Caleb Richardson collected all of Thomas's personal papers, including the financial calculations that had triggered the crisis. These documents, along with Thomas's ledger books and correspondence, were burned in the communal fireplace that same night during what Samuel Richardson called a cleansing ceremony to purge worldly attachments from our sacred space. The community's reaction revealed how completely the Richardsons controlled both information and emotional responses. Within hours of Thomas's death, Sister Martha was leading prayer circles where members confessed their own doubts and worldly thoughts, creating an environment where questioning leadership became inseparable from spiritual failure. Brother Ezekiel organized demanding work schedules that kept potential questioners occupied from dawn to dusk, leaving no opportunity for private conversation or independent thought. Brother Jeremiah led evening discussions about the dangers of challenging spiritual authority, using Thomas as a cautionary example of what happened when faith wavered. The most chilling aspect of the community's response was how swiftly Thomas Whitman's memory was systematically erased. His personal belongings were redistributed within days. His work assignments were transferred to others. His name was removed from community records except for a brief death notice. Within a month, it was as though Brother Thomas had never existed at all, his questions forgotten, his concerns dismissed as the ramblings of a mind corrupted by worldly attachment. In the months following Thomas Whitman's death, a pattern began to take shape that would persist for over 2 decades, growing more refined and ruthless with each passing year. Members who asked probing questions about finances, who expressed a desire to visit family outside the community, or who showed signs of wanting to leave Pleasant Hill began experiencing what the Richardsons called spiritual crisis, requiring special intervention. Brother Jeremiah Richardson developed what became known as the retreat system for managing dissent. When someone questioned community practices or displayed signs of independence, they were assigned to special prayer and fasting retreats in isolated cabins scattered across the community's extensive property. These retreats, always supervised by Richardson family members, were presented as opportunities for troubled souls to reconnect with divine purpose through solitude and meditation. The retreat cabins, constructed under Brother Jeremiah's direction in remote corners of the community's thousands of acres, were designed to appear rustic and spiritual while serving their true function as holding facilities. Each cabin contained a single room with basic furniture, heavy wooden shutters that could be barred from outside, and doors that locked only from the exterior. Their isolated locations, connected to the main community only by narrow paths through dense forest, ensured that any sounds from within would never reach other members. Brother Caleb Richardson managed the logistics of identifying retreat candidates. His network of informants throughout the community reported private conversations, observed relationships, and monitored correspondence for signs of disloyalty or independent thinking. His methods were so subtle that most members never realized they were being watched, attributing chance encounters with Caleb to coincidence rather than systematic surveillance. Sister Hannah Collins managed the community's correspondence with remarkable sophistication, ensuring that concerned family members received carefully crafted letters explaining their loved ones' sudden departures or deaths. Her penmanship was flawless, and she had studied each member's writing style with scientific precision, enabling her to produce convincing forgeries after only brief study. Her operation required extensive preparation. She maintained detailed files on each community member's background, including handwriting samples, information about distant relatives, and knowledge of their pre-conversion lives. When someone was chosen for elimination, Hannah would prepare a series of letters to be dispatched over several months, constructing the illusion of an ongoing correspondence that gradually accounted for the person's absence. Parents in Ohio received touching notes from children they would never see again, describing spiritual revelations calling them to missionary work in distant territories. Siblings in Pennsylvania received detailed accounts of peaceful deaths following brief illnesses, complete with descriptions of final words and burial ceremonies that never occurred. The letters were masterworks of emotional manipulation, designed to provide closure while discouraging further inquiry. Brother Isaiah Richardson's seed business offered perfect cover for disposing of evidence and maintaining the community's external relationships. His monthly journeys to distant farms provided opportunities to bury bodies in remote locations across Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee, while simultaneously conducting legitimate business that reinforced his standing as a trustworthy merchant. Isaiah's routes were carefully plotted to serve multiple purposes. His legitimate customers provided alibis for his presence in distant locations, while his knowledge of remote farm properties enabled him to identify burial sites that would never be found. The disposal process was methodical and efficient. Bodies were transported in specially modified seed wagons that appeared to carry ordinary agricultural supplies but contained hidden compartments built for their grim cargo. Local authorities, when they occasionally inquired about missing persons, were shown the immaculate records maintained by Sister Patience Richardson, documentation that demonstrated through carefully crafted paperwork that individuals had departed voluntarily for other communities or had died of natural causes with proper burial in the community cemetery. The psychological control the Richardson family maintained was perhaps more disturbing than their physical crimes. They had built a closed system where questioning authority equated to spiritual failure, where blind obedience was the highest virtue, and where members policed each other's thoughts and behaviors. The remaining community members weren't merely victims, they had been reshaped into unwitting accomplices in their own oppression. The community's population remained steady at around 400 members despite a constant stream of new arrivals and the mysterious disappearances that occurred with growing frequency. This stability was maintained through what Brother Caleb privately called natural selection, the systematic removal of anyone who threatened family control, balanced by aggressive recruitment of new converts whose property donations funded the operation's continued expansion. New arrivals were carefully evaluated by the Richardson women, who had developed sophisticated methods for identifying potential troublemakers before they could influence others. Sister Rebecca's intake interviews, conducted under the guise of spiritual counseling, actually served to assess each convert's psychological profile, family connections, and potential value to the community. Those deemed dangerous were marked for early elimination, while valuable converts underwent intensive indoctrination designed to strip away their previous identities. By 1825, Pleasant Hill operated like a finely tuned machine of exploitation, its various components working together with mechanical precision that would have impressed any efficiency expert. The Richardson family had spent 18 years refining their methods, transforming what had begun as opportunistic criminality into a sophisticated enterprise that generated enormous profits while preserving an impeccable public reputation. Samuel Richardson maintained his role as spiritual leader and public face of the community, delivering inspiring sermons that drew new converts while keeping existing members focused on heavenly rewards rather than earthly concerns. Martha Richardson had developed what amounted to a science of psychological manipulation, studying each community member with the intensity of a naturalist examining specimens. Her methods for dismantling individual resistance and rebuilding personalities had become so refined that the process typically required only 3 to 4 months to complete. The most insidious development was how the family had begun selling community members to buyers operating plantations and industrial facilities throughout the South and Midwest. This human trafficking operation, coordinated primarily by Brother Isaiah during his seed business travels, produced the highest profit margins of any family enterprise while explaining the mysterious disappearances that might otherwise have raised suspicion. The selection process for trafficking victims followed coldly calculated criteria. Younger members with valuable skills but dangerous independent tendencies were prime candidates, as were individuals whose family connections made their continued presence at Pleasant Hill potentially problematic. Buyers, who believed they were purchasing indentured servants rather than free citizens, paid substantial sums for workers who arrived with fabricated documentation proving their voluntary servitude. Sister Rebecca Richardson had become the family's specialist in breaking down new converts and determining their fate. Her psychological assessments, disguised as spiritual counseling, enabled her to categorize newcomers into 3 groups: valuable long-term assets who would remain at Pleasant Hill, potential trafficking victims who could be sold for profit, and dangerous individuals requiring immediate elimination. Her methods combined genuine spiritual guidance with systematic abuse that created powerful trauma bonds between victims and their handlers. The beginning of the end for the Richardson family's 27-year reign of terror came from an unexpected direction. Their own success had begun attracting attention from legitimate Shaker leadership in Ohio. In late 1833, the Ohio Union of Shaker Communities decided to dispatch Elder Joseph Meacham, one of their most experienced and respected leaders, to evaluate Pleasant Hill for potential inclusion in their formal alliance of authenticated Shaker settlements. Elder Meacham was not the kind of visitor the Richardsons were accustomed to managing. A genuine disciple of Mother and Lee's teachings who had spent 40 years in Shaker communities across New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, he possessed intimate knowledge of proper Shaker practices, record-keeping, and community structure that made him nearly impossible to deceive. His mission was to confirm that Pleasant Hill truly adhered to authentic Shaker principles before recommending their inclusion in the union's collective governance. Samuel Richardson initially welcomed the evaluation with apparent enthusiasm, confident that his family's carefully maintained facade would fool yet another religious leader. After all, they had successfully deceived hundreds of visitors over the years. But Meacham's first requests immediately set off alarm bells throughout the Richardson network. Unlike previous visitors who were satisfied with guided tours and carefully staged demonstrations of community life, Meacham wanted to examine financial records stretching back to the community's founding in 1807. He insisted on speaking privately with randomly selected members without Richardson family supervision. Most dangerously of all, he brought his own accounting ledgers and intended to reconcile Pleasant Hill's reported membership numbers with their consumption records, work output, and correspondence logs. The scope of Meacham's investigation became clear during his first meeting with Samuel Richardson. "Brother Samuel," Meacham said in his quiet but firm voice, "the Ohio Union has developed standardized procedures for evaluating potential member communities. We'll need to review your membership rolls, financial records, correspondence files, and burial registers for the past 5 years. We'll also need to conduct private interviews with at least 50 members, selected through random drawing." Samuel's response revealed the first crack in his usually flawless composure. "Elder Meacham, we are honored by your visit and eager to demonstrate our commitment to Mother And's teachings. However, our record-keeping follows Kentucky practices that may differ from Ohio standards. Perhaps we could arrange a more informal evaluation that better reflects our unique circumstances. Meacham's expression stayed pleasant but immovable. I appreciate your regional considerations, Brother Samuel, but union standards apply equally to all communities regardless of location. Authentic Shaker practices are universal, not subject to regional variation. We'll begin with the membership rolls and burial registers tomorrow morning. That evening, the Richardson family convened an emergency meeting in Samuel's private quarters, their voices barely above whispers. Mother Sarah Richardson, despite her apparent frailty, took command of the strategy session. "This man knows things we cannot fabricate," she said urgently. "He's requesting documentation we cannot supply without exposing everything. We need to delay, deflect, and if necessary, eliminate the threat before he completes his investigation." Brother Isaiah was the first to lay out the full scope of their vulnerability. "He's asking for records going back 5 years, but our problems stretch back much further. The membership numbers alone will expose us. Our books show 400 members, but we have maybe 250 actually living here. The burial registers are even worse. We have graves for people who supposedly left for other communities." Sister Hannah added another terrifying dimension. "He's already identified inconsistencies in the correspondence I've been maintaining with other communities. He knows Shaker writing conventions I never learned. He's asking questions about Mother Lee's teachings that our people can't answer, because they were never properly instructed." The family's attempts to delay and redirect Meacham's investigation only deepened his suspicions. When they claimed certain records were stored in a building recently damaged by storms, he pointed out that none of the structures showed any signs of weather damage. When they offered to introduce specific members who could vouch for community practices, he insisted on selecting interview subjects himself through random drawing. Brother Caleb Richardson's surveillance network, so effective against community members, proved useless against an investigator who understood the value of operational security. Meacham varied his routines, conducted interviews in shifting locations, and seemed to carry an intuitive awareness of when he was being observed. His questions during member interviews revealed a depth of knowledge about authentic Shaker practices that made the family's deceptions impossible to sustain. Most dangerously, certain surviving members began responding to Meacham's genuine spiritual presence in ways that terrified the Richardson family. Sister Mary Caldwell, who had witnessed Brother Thomas Whitman's suspicious death more than 20 years earlier, found herself drawn to Meacham's obvious authenticity and began quietly sharing her long-suppressed observations about members who had mysteriously vanished. The psychological effect of Meacham's presence on community members was immediate and profound. For the first time in decades, they encountered someone whose spiritual authority depended not on fear or manipulation but on genuine knowledge and compassion. His thoughtful questions, his obvious familiarity with authentic Shaker practices, and his evident concern for their welfare created an atmosphere in which long-buried doubts and memories began carefully rising to the surface. The investigation reached its pivotal moment when Meacham requested access to the community cemetery for a private memorial service honoring departed members. The Richardson family couldn't refuse such a reasonable request without appearing suspicious, but they also couldn't allow him to examine the burial grounds too closely without risking exposure. Brother Caleb volunteered to escort Meacham to the cemetery, hoping to control what he observed and limit his time among the graves. But Meacham's trained eye immediately caught inconsistencies that had gone unnoticed for decades. The burial patterns didn't match the dates in official records, and the condition of grave markers suggested far more interments than documented deaths could account for. "Brother Caleb," Meacham said quietly as they stood among the headstones, "I've noticed some irregularities in your burial records. This grave marker indicates Brother William died in 1829, but your correspondence files include letters from him dated 1830. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Caleb's answer revealed the desperation beginning to infect the entire family. "Elder Meacham, perhaps there was an error in our record-keeping. Our sister Patience maintains extensive files, but even the most careful keeper can make mistakes when dealing with so many members over so many years." Meacham's expression remained thoughtful but unconvinced. "I understand that record-keeping can be challenging. But Shaker communities traditionally maintain extremely accurate documentation of deaths and departures. The inconsistencies I'm observing suggest systematic problems rather than occasional errors." On the night of March 15, 1834, Elder Meacham made a discovery that would expose the full scope of the Richardson family's 27-year campaign of terror. Unable to sleep, his mind turning over the inconsistencies he had uncovered during 3 weeks of investigation, he decided to examine the community cemetery by moonlight, hoping to reconcile burial records with actual grave sites without Richardson's supervision. What he found was a graveyard that told two entirely different stories. The official cemetery, maintained for visitors and formal inspections, contained approximately 40 graves with proper headstones dating from 1807 to 1834. The markers were well-crafted and expensive, arranged in neat rows suggesting careful planning. But Meacham's experienced eye, sharpened by decades managing authentic Shaker communities, detected inconsistencies in the ground itself that revealed a far more sinister reality. Areas throughout the cemetery showed faint depressions and variations in soil color suggesting many more burials than the headstones indicated. The disturbed earth in these unmarked sections had been allowed to settle, forming barely visible indentations that would escape casual notice but were unmistakable to someone who understood how burial grounds aged. The vegetation patterns confirmed it. Certain areas supported different plant growth, indicating soil that had been repeatedly disturbed and replaced. More chilling still, when he examined the dated grave markers closely, Meacham realized that many of the supposed death dates corresponded exactly with the names of members who had allegedly departed Pleasant Hill to establish new communities or visit distant relatives. The timeline was impossible. How could someone be buried at Pleasant Hill on the same day they were reported to have set off for Ohio or Tennessee? His methodical examination of each marker revealed a pattern of deception so elaborate that it demonstrated years of careful planning. Members who had supposedly died of natural causes were buried alongside those who had allegedly left for missionary work in distant territories. The dates formed a chronicle of systematic elimination, one that aligned perfectly with moments when the community had faced potential exposure or internal resistance. Meacham's investigation was interrupted by Sister Mary Caldwell, who had been watching from her dormitory window and recognized that this might be the only opportunity she would ever have to tell the truth she had carried in silence for over 20 years. Moving soundlessly through the darkness, she approached the lantern-lit figure among the gravestones. "Elder Meacham," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed fear and long-awaited relief. "God has sent you to reveal what we've been too terrified to speak. What you're seeing here is only a fraction of what the Richardson family has done to this community." In a conversation conducted in hushed tones among the silent graves, Mary revealed the horrifying truth she had guarded in terror for 2 decades. "I've watched them bury people in the middle of the night," she said, her voice shaking. "The Richardson family doesn't just control this community, they've been systematically murdering anyone who threatens their power or asks the wrong questions." Mary's testimony painted a picture of organized elimination that extended far beyond occasional murders. "Sister Hannah Collins keeps poisons in the kitchen stores," Mary revealed, her words tumbling out with the urgency of someone finally permitted to speak the truth. "I've seen her preparing special meals for people who were asking too many questions. Brother Thomas Whitman wasn't the first. He was just the first time I was brave enough to truly see what was happening." The full scope of the family's criminal network emerged as Mary continued. "Brother Caleb Richardson knows which members are planning to leave before they even announce it. He reads private letters and listens at dormitory doors. He keeps a list of people he calls problems, and they disappear within days of being identified." She glanced nervously toward the main buildings before continuing. "Brother Jeremiah is the one who disposes of the bodies. He has burial sites spread across Kentucky, places he uses during his furniture delivery trips. I've seen him loading covered wagons at night. I've seen him return with empty wagons and dirt under his fingernails." The most horrifying revelation was the breadth of the family's operation beyond murder. Mary described a human trafficking network that sold the community's younger, healthier members to plantation owners and industrial operations as indentured servants. "They don't kill everyone," she explained. "The young ones, the strong ones, they sell them. Brother Isaiah's seed business is a cover. He's actually delivering people to buyers throughout the South." Elder Meacham realized with devastating clarity that Pleasant Hill had never been a corrupted Shaker community. It was a criminal enterprise that had never been legitimately Shaker at all. Mary's knowledge of the community's early history suggested that the Richardson family had likely murdered the original Shaker founders, then assumed their identities to inherit a ready-made community of trusting, obedient followers. "The real Elder Samuel died in 1808, Mary whispered, just 1 year after the community was established. I was only a girl then, but I remember him being different. Gentler. More concerned with our spiritual welfare than with profits and control. The man who calls himself Samuel Richardson today is someone else entirely." As dawn approached, Meacham faced a terrible choice. If he confronted the Richardson family directly with what he now knew, he would almost certainly become their next victim, and his death would eliminate the only outside witness to their crimes. But if he left Pleasant Hill to seek help, the family might eliminate all remaining witnesses before authorities could arrive. The weight of nearly 300 lives lost and 250 souls still trapped pressed upon him as he knelt among the silent graves. Mary Caldwell waited beside him, her fate now bound to his decision. Around them, the cemetery kept its secrets in the pre-dawn darkness, bearing witness to decades of systematic murder disguised as religious devotion. Elder Meacham's decision to flee Pleasant Hill in the pre-dawn hours of March 16, 1834, taking Mary Caldwell with him as a witness, set in motion the events that would finally bring justice to the Richardson family's victims. They rode through the night to Harrodsburg, where Meacham persuaded Sheriff Morrison and a federal marshal to organize an immediate raid on the community. Armed with Mary's detailed testimony and Meacham's documentation of the numerous discrepancies he had uncovered, the authorities moved quickly. The federal marshal, Captain James Crawford, brought a detachment of 12 men and legal authority that superseded local jurisdiction, ensuring the Richardson family couldn't rely on their network of corrupted officials to escape. It later emerged that Sheriff Morrison had been receiving regular payments from the Richardson family in exchange for his willful blindness to their activities. What authorities discovered upon their return to Pleasant Hill was a scene that haunts Kentucky law enforcement records to this day. The Richardson family, realizing their exposure was inevitable, had made a desperate decision to eliminate all witnesses and flee with whatever portable wealth they could carry. Of the 250 community members who had been alive when Meacham arrived 3 weeks earlier, only 37 were found still living when the raid began. These survivors, discovered locked in basement storage rooms beneath the community's main buildings, had been confined without food or water for 2 days while the family debated whether to kill them all or select the most valuable for sale to distant buyers before abandoning Kentucky permanently. Chosen for their youth and physical capability rather than out of any mercy, these survivors represented the strongest evidence of the family's human trafficking operations. Several had already been earmarked for sale to plantation owners in Mississippi and Alabama, with transportation arrangements completed and payments received. Their testimony revealed a systematic operation that had sold hundreds of community members into slavery while maintaining the appearance of voluntary departures for missionary work. The physical evidence uncovered during the raid confirmed every horrific detail. Hidden burial sites were found throughout the community's extensive property, containing remains showing signs of poisoning, strangulation, and blunt force trauma. The sites were meticulously organized. Detailed maps discovered in Brother Jeremiah Richardson's workshop indicated the precise location of every concealed grave. Searchers uncovered over 150 unmarked graves scattered across thousands of acres, many containing multiple bodies disposed of during the same periods. The condition of the remains, combined with artifacts found alongside them, confirmed that the Richardson family had been methodically murdering community members since at least 1812, with the killing accelerating dramatically in recent years. In the Richardson family's private quarters, investigators found detailed ledgers documenting their human trafficking operations with the precision of a legitimate business. The records included buyers' names, prices paid for individual community members, and detailed descriptions of those being sold. The operation had generated over $40,000 in profits over the past decade, far exceeding the income from their legitimate business activities. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of Martha Richardson's personal journal, which laid bare the psychological techniques the family had developed to maintain control over their victims. Written over 15 years, the journal documented systematic experiments in human manipulation that would have impressed modern psychologists with their sophistication and ruthlessness. Martha's writings showed no remorse for the hundreds of lives her family had destroyed. Instead, they contained clinical observations about which methods proved most effective for different personality types, detailed analyses of how to dismantle psychological resistance, and strategic planning for expanding their operations into other states. Her entries revealed a woman who regarded other human beings as resources to be exploited, not souls deserving of dignity or compassion. The journal also contained detailed psychological profiles of every community member, updated regularly through her network of female informants. These profiles assessed each person's value as a worker, their potential for resistance, their usefulness for future labor, and their suitability for various forms of exploitation. The Richardson family's fate was swift, though their trial revealed details that shocked even the most experienced law enforcement officials. Samuel, Martha, and their 6 adult children were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, fraud, and human trafficking. The trial, conducted in Frankfort throughout the summer of 1834, drew national attention as newspapers across the country covered the unprecedented scope of their crimes. Witness after witness described decades of psychological torture, physical abuse, and systematic murder carried out with the efficiency of a business operation. The evidence was so overwhelming that the jury needed only 2 hours to return guilty verdicts on all charges. All 7 Richardson family members were sentenced to death, with executions carried out in October 1834 before crowds that included many former community members who had escaped, or been sold into slavery, years earlier. The executions provided a measure of justice for the victims, but they could not restore the lives that had been stolen or heal the trauma that would shadow survivors for the rest of their days. The 37 survivors faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding their lives after decades of psychological and physical abuse that had stripped away their identities and severed their connections to the outside world. Many struggled with what we would now recognize as severe post-traumatic stress disorder, unable to trust religious communities, authority figures, or even their own instincts about other people's intentions. Several survivors never recovered. The systematic psychological abuse they had endured left them unable to function independently, and they spent their remaining years in state institutions, haunted by memories of the horrors they had witnessed and the friends they had watched disappear into the Richardson family's machinery. Others found the strength to rebuild, aided by genuine religious communities that offered psychological support and practical assistance. The Ohio Union of Shaker Communities, led by Elder Meacham, established a special fund to help Pleasant Hill survivors transition to ordinary life, providing financial support, job training, and counseling that helped many eventually reach some measure of peace and stability. The state of Kentucky quietly sealed most of the Pleasant Hill investigation records, concerned that publishing the full details would damage the region's reputation and discourage religious settlement throughout the Bluegrass region. The community's buildings were eventually demolished under state supervision, and the land was sold to private farmers who were told only that the previous religious community had disbanded following financial difficulties. The secrecy surrounding the case meant that many details never became public knowledge, allowing rumor and speculation to fill the space where facts should have stood. This deliberate obscurity served the state's interests in preventing similar crimes and protecting Kentucky's reputation, but it also meant that the victims' stories were never fully told, and their suffering never adequately acknowledged. Modern historians who have gained access to the sealed records estimate that the Richardson family murdered or sold into slavery over 400 people during their 27-year operation. The true number may be even higher, as their record-keeping prioritized profits over comprehensive documentation, and many victims may have been eliminated without any record of their existence at Pleasant Hill. This story shows us how easily religious faith can be weaponized by those who understand the psychology of control and manipulation. The Richardson family succeeded for nearly 3 decades because they exploited people's deepest spiritual longings, transforming the desire for divine connection into an instrument of oppression and murder. Their success depended on the isolation they constructed around their victims, cutting them off from outside support and making resistance seem not just futile, but unthinkable. The Pleasant Hill tragedy reminds us that evil often disguises itself as virtue, using the language of spirituality and community to mask the most brutal exploitation. The Richardson family's ability to sustain their facade for so many years demonstrates the critical importance of maintaining genuine connections between religious communities and the broader society, ensuring that isolation never becomes so complete that abuse can flourish undetected. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was eventually revealed, or could there be even darker secrets still buried in Kentucky's sealed archives? The state's decision to keep most records classified suggests that the full scope of the Richardson family's crimes may never be entirely understood. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and share your theories about what other horrors might still be hidden in those forbidden files. If you enjoyed this and want more stories like it, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. I'll see you in the next one.